Great. I'm Aggie Malter. I'm the Executive Director of PAISBOA, and I am delighted that we are all here together today. This program has been 2 years in the making. I attended the NBOA Business Officers Institute 2 years ago at the recommendation of my board chair, who said, if you want street cred with the business officers, you have got to attend this program. So I did. And I thought to myself, if I had been at this boot camp for business officers before I started the job at PAISBOA, I would have run screaming out of there and hidden under my bed, because it was intense. It was 5 days, and they bussed us to school. They put us in classrooms. They talked at us all day. They fed us lunch. They brought us back in the classrooms. They gave us mentors. They gave us groups. So they did an awesome job, but it was all business office all the time, and it was unbelievably intense and valuable. And this is the first time that I saw the NBOA Long-Range Financial Planning Model. Now, I had just come off being Director of Accreditation for PAIS, and when I try to explain to you what we got for the long-range financial planning documents that we asked for, you would not believe it. I didn't believe it. Now, I am no business officer. I'm not a CPA. I don't play one on TV. I don't pretend to be any of that. But I do know that the last thing you want to give a business officer is a narrative document, right? You people want spreadsheets. Spreadsheets all day, every day. We got a 20-page narrative document for a long-range financial plan. I went into Linda Phelps and I said, oh my gosh, if we're the two smartest people in the room about this, we're in big trouble. So suffice it to say, I've been looking for something to help schools come up with a long-range financial planning model for a long time. And when I went to NBOA, I said, oh my gosh, here it is. So I am so pleased that Linda Phelps and Lukey Wells are here with us today from PAIS and agreed to partnering with us for this, because it's awesome that we can do that. And they have been terrific partners, and they understand the value of this program today better than I do, probably. And we are so fortunate to have Kay Markunas here from NBOA, who is going to walk us through this process. She is pretty much the expert in this. I've seen her present this as well, and I think you're going to get a lot out of it. I hope that you either loaded your numbers in the document or have them enough in your head that you'll be able to play around, because we're going to give you some time to play around with that today and pull all the different levers that will make changes and allow you to see different scenarios. And I also want to thank our sponsors, Malvern Bank, for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Rachel and have her introduce our terrific sponsors. That also has taken about 2 years for us to happen. So I feel like the stars have aligned and everything is all set and we're ready to go. So Rachel?
Good morning, or good afternoon. Well, we're a minute from the afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Tilney, Consortium Manager here at PAISBOA. Delighted to thank again Malvern Bank for sponsoring this event for us and to introduce you to John Lyons.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, can we give a round of applause to PAIS, PAISBOA, and NBOA and our speaker today, because they've done a fantastic job already doing this. So again, my name's John Lyons. I work at Malvern Bank National Association. I'm joined by my colleague, Kevin Guns, in the corner over there. At the bank, my role is pretty much a private banking officer, and Kevin, he's a commercial lender who does a really great job working with me on our independent school division. So a little bit about the bank, just to let you know about us. So basically, our CEO, Tony Wegley, he had been the CEO of a bank in New Jersey called Center Bank. So he, in that division, had pretty much launched an independent school market, and he pretty much said, all right, we're hearing a lot from these schools that they're not really getting a lot of the time and attention that they feel like they need from their business partners and financial partners. So he really did some listening and worked with those schools in that region, as well as the New Jersey Association of Independent Schools and started kind of building out that division. So in about 4 years' time, he had successfully built a division of 24 college prep schools, independent schools, as well as universities to kind of serve their needs in a creative way. So now that he came to Malvern Bank about 5 years ago, he wanted to replicate that model because, as we know, we have the most competitive independent school marketplace in the country, right? So we have a lot going on here in terms of opportunity, but also in terms of things that we need to be working together with the right partners in place. So for the last couple of years, you might have been seeing us at ADVIS, the Association of Delaware Valley Independent Schools, including about a week ago for the Heads of School Dinner and Dialogue. Through that relationship, we've been very fortunate to learn a lot about the decisions that you're making every day. So it's really helped us kind of think about every school, every region is a little unique. So we have to be a little bit mindful about that as we inform our products and programming. So for any of you who might be going to the Financial Officers Conference for the New Jersey Association of Independent Schools, you'll see me there. So I'll be there tomorrow and Thursday, kind of welcoming some of our schools there and also looking to meet some new friendly faces. So again, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Aggie, her team at PAISBOA, and as well as PAIS and NBOA for making this program a reality. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Kay Markunas to you from NBOA National Business Officers Association.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Excuse me, I'm just going to minimize the Zoom screen so we don't have that in the screen. I will tell you right now, I tend to talk with my hands, so if I knock the mic, I apologize. I do that frequently. Okay, so I am Director of Research. Okay, my internet connection is unstable. I'm Director of Research and Member Resources at the National Business Officers Association. I've been there for about 4 years. Prior to that, I was the Director of Finance and Operations at the Avery Coonley School in Downers Grove, Illinois. Beautiful little pre-K through 8, just outside of the Chicago area. Beautiful historic building, you know, kind of in the middle, literally in the middle of Downers Grove. When they built the building, we have aerial shots, and there was nothing around the school. Now we are completely landlocked. But we were fortunate that the founder gave us 10.5 acres. So for us, that's a lot of land where we are. I'm faculty of the Long-Range Financial Modeling course, which we do as one of our online courses, along with several other courses that I teach. And have also been in corporate finance and engineering, so I like to joke that this is my 4th career. And prior to joining NBOA, while I was at the school, I was also on the NBOA Board of Directors and had some other board service. So that's just a little bit about me. This is meant to be a very interactive session, so please feel free to raise your hand, you know, ask questions. We will spend time, like Aggie said, you have time to literally get into the model and your numbers, ask questions. I'll walk around, so there will be plenty of time to do that if you haven't already done it, which we didn't tell you you had to, so don't worry. So why do we do long-range financial modeling? Well, you should have a long-range strategic plan for your school. And hopefully either you have one or you're working on one, and it's in place. And usually these are really good, sometimes even very grand plans for our schools. And while it's really important to be aspirational, it's really important to know how you're going to pay for all these things. So that's, you know, why some of the financial modeling goes along with the strategic modeling. And so you have to know how to pay for your strategic plans. And sometimes outside of your strategic plan, something comes up, a great idea comes up. You want to add a makerspace, or this new program is brought to you by some of your faculty members and you really want to implement it. So you need to figure out how you're going to pay for that. And the important thing there is to remember is sometimes to add something new, you will have to let something else go. So, oops, sorry, like I said, there we go. Don't always try to cram everything in. You really need to evaluate. And some of the modeling will allow you to say, okay, here, if I put it all in, this is where we are. But if I take out, you know, this older program, this is what it does for us. So that's a nice way to do this. The other thing this helps you do is helps you help your board fulfill their fiduciary responsibility. one of their main responsibilities is to make sure the school is there in perpetuity. And so they have to shepherd the resources of the school, and this helps them do that. The other thing it can help you do is avoid a knee-jerk reaction to sudden events. Say something happens, there's another economic downturn, and you lose a bunch of students. Well, okay, the first reaction might be, well, let's give more financial aid. So if we give more financial aid, then they'll come back and we'll be good. But if you don't kind of plan how you do that, you may find that 10 years down the road, your financial aid is way more of a percentage of your gross tuition than you thought it was going to be. So if you can model it out, then you can see where that's going to go and either make adjustments or say, no, this isn't the right plan. This is, how we're going to have to, how we're going to have to do it. The other thing too about this model is this is really set up to kind of put you in the ballpark. No one is ever going to come back to you 10 years from now, if you do this plan today, 10 years and say, okay, show me how well you did relative to this 10-year plan you did. You're just getting in the ballpark. You're seeing how things are going. It's big buckets of expenses and income. Don't try and get really detailed. Sometimes in the course I get people wanting to literally do a line-by-line, P&L and their inputs. I'm like, don't. That's way too specific. So just to give you an idea where the long-range financial model came from, there's a school out in Boston, Buckingham, Brown, and Nichols, and their chief finance officer and their controller had been having the same conversation with the board year over year, like how much do we raise tuition? Is it 4.2%? Is it 4.3%? Is it 5%? Is it 3 point whatever? So they'd have the same conversation over and over again. So in an attempt to try and do something about that, as they called it, the Groundhog's Day conversation, the CFO and the controller went back and did research over the past 10 years and looked at what their yearly tuition increase would be, and it exceeded inflation by 3% on average every year. So then they said, okay, why is it doing this? So then they started looking at the drivers. Well, it wasn't faculty salary increases, because those were pretty much in line with tuition. Medical benefits had increased greater than inflation, but relatively speaking on their budget, it was a small portion, so that wasn't what was driving it. Financial aid had also increased a little more than inflation, but that also was a relatively small piece of the budget, so it wasn't what was driving it. And when they finally got down to it, it turns out it was FTEs. They were adding support personnel, so they were increasing their headcount, which we at independent schools have a tendency to do. Like, oh, we need this position, so we add it. And we need this position, we add it. And the next thing we know, we've added 6 people and no more kids and no more income. So need to think about this. So like I said, they presented all this information to their board, and they finally got their board's agreement that they would just increase inflation or increase tuition by inflation every year. That was it. So then the school had to work within those parameters, and it made it much easier for the CFO and controller because they knew what the increase would be. The board didn't have to have the discussion, and it allowed them to kind of adjust things because everybody at the school knew we're just working off inflation. So they built this model to make it easier for themselves, and every year they would, build their model, put it all together, put the assumptions, show the board how it modeled out for the 10 years, and then save it, and then the next year start over. So that they were always looking out 10 years so they could see where things were going, but they started new every year. And I would encourage you to do that too. Don't worry about continuing to build on the same model. I mean, you certainly can, and I know schools who have kind of created a model and then put in their first year, and then at the end of the year put in their actuals and kind of lock that column and then built it up so that they may have like 5 years of history and 5 years of projection. So that's something you can do. But NBOA obtained the model in about 2012, and it was vetted by a number of volunteers, and we started using it in March of 2013. And just so you know, there's this, I know this is being recorded, but there's also, for NBOA members, there are a number of resources on our website for on the model. And then if you feel like this wasn't quite enough, there is a 3-week course on the long-range financial model that you can enroll in. That's open to anybody. So now we're going to get started. So this is just the worksheets in the model, and I'm going to go through all of the worksheets next. So there's a number of them. The first 3 are the ones that you kind of spend the most time working on in terms of your input. And instructions is just a list of things to keep in mind. But the current year input sheet and the assumption sheet is where you do all your data entry. And then the rest of them are the results pages. So we are going to flip over to the model here. Come back. Okay. So this model does have a built-in macro. It's and so I would encourage you to enable the content, which is usually, the macro, and it's been tested and it is safe. I know your IT folks will be wondering, but you should be good there. This is your instruction tab, and it has a lot of really good information about the model. It lists the spreadsheet. It'll list some really important things like enabling the macros. If you are really comfortable in Excel and you want to, you can unlock the worksheets in the model and add lines and customize them to your school. It's certainly something you can do. I would say if you even want to attempt it, save a copy of the original model so you have something to go back to in case you make an oops. I would encourage you to do that no matter what. Just have a blank copy of the model sitting someplace. Because sometimes even if you haven't unlocked anything and you're doing some scenario testing, sometimes it's easier just to look at two separate models just to keep things, especially if you're making a lot of changes to your assumptions. But you can unlock the model. The password is the super secret down here, NBOA in all capital letters. And you will do this, you'll have to unlock each worksheet page just as you go. And so then it also has some good information about what is on the current inputs tab and where you input the data. So just keep in mind, and if you'd like to follow along, if you've got it, that's fine. So this is just, as I said, instructions and a good place to refer back to if you have a question about kind of what's going on in the model. So the next tab we're going to look at is the current year inputs. And this is where you put in your budget information. Current year, we're in a kind of interesting space right now. We're towards the tail end of the current year budget, and you may or may not have your budget for next year. So whichever is easier for you to work with, I would encourage you to work with right now. If it's just the current year budget because you haven't really finalized your next year budget, that's fine. In the spreadsheet where there is this, on your real spreadsheet it looks more yellow. This is a lovely kind of ugly green here, but these are all cells that you can actually customize. So, and this is where you would put in the numbers of students you have in these various levels. If you were just, like a preschool and you just had, pre-K2, pre-K3, pre-K4, then you could just have 3 lines. There are 6 lines here for you to enter your groups in. I would say bucket them if you can. Okay, we've got. We should figure out how to mute this. Actually, let me do that. Sorry.
Everything else is out?
All right, mute. Let's see. There, hopefully that takes care of it. Is that muting me? Ugh. Sorry. I haven't done Zoom as a presentation in a while, so. Why can't I unmute her? The little square? Okay. Unmute. All right, let's see. Hopefully this will go away. Sorry about that. So you add the, I think we've got it. Just they were talking and we could hear them. So here you would enter your pre-kindergarten or whatever your grade levels are. And now the data that's in here is there as an example. We've gone back and forth as to whether or not we provide people with a model that's loaded with some example data or not. And if we found that if we give it to them blank, they just don't quite figure it out. So you can just delete everything that is in the yellow cells. But in this case, this is a school that has 28 children they're expecting for this year in their pre-kindergarten, 64 in kindergarten, et cetera. So you load in, and your total down here, which sums, should be the total enrollment that you're expecting for the budget. And then you put in the tuition amount per student, because what this model will do is it'll take the number of students by the tuition per student and multiply it out in one of the other sheets. So this is a per student number here. And then we have financial aid and other discounts. So this is where you would put your financial aid, and this would, for the most part, be your need-based and your merit-based aid in this line. We also have tuition remission in 2 places in this model, depending on how you do your accounting for it. Technically, GAAP says that tuition remission should be an employee benefit expense, so you should be carrying it in the benefits line. Now, I know not all schools do that, which is fine, but just know that you should put it wherever you normally budget for it in this model. So you'll see farther down there is a space for tuition remission. And then when you look at your total tuition, when you multiply the tuition level by the students and minus the financial aid and your remission, if it doesn't quite tie, you can use this plug number to make it tie, because sometimes there are other discounts, sibling discounts or whatever that you may have. So then the lines 1 through 6 are for other operating incomes you might have. Summer programs, auxiliary programs, anything else you might have. So these will go in here and you can just type over. There are some little red carets that have notes, so if you hover over those will tell you what can go in those spaces. Then we move down into annual giving and support and endowment draw. Annual giving is in as a fixed number right now, and then when you go over to the assumption sheets, which I'll show you next, you need to type in that number every year. It doesn't automatically follow over because, hopefully you can increase your annual giving or so. You may have some plans for what you're going to do with your annual giving, so that'll go in as a fixed number each year. Endowment draw, if you have it, you can put that in. If you don't, that's fine if it's 0. If you do have an endowment, what you can do is load the prior 3 fiscal years market values so that you have kind of a rolling average for a draw, if that's how you do it. And then you put in a return rate, which this is your starting return rate. I'll show you on the assumption sheets where you can make other assumptions about it. If you're expecting some big gifts or something to your endowment, you can throw these here. If you don't have an endowment, you do need to put in at least $1 in all these cells so that it makes all the formulas work. And $1 isn't going to throw you off by that much. So then you get down to your total operating income here for your revenues. And so in theory, if you've entered everything pretty correctly, it should tie to what you've got budgeted. So then we move into the operating expenses, and we use a mean faculty salary. So mean faculty salary, mean admin, and then mean other. So you put in these numbers. If you don't have that exact number right now, an estimate's fine. And then the head count in the 3 categories. So then this will calculate down here. Normally you'll need a plug because a mean salary isn't going to cover everybody correctly. Retirement benefits that you've got, any other health insurance, et cetera. This is the other place where I said the tuition remission might be. So if you are budgeting it as an expense, it would go there. And then you have 8 expense lines where you can kind of bucket your expenses together, however you see fit. I would say bucket them pretty broadly and make the assumption that the buckets, whatever you're bucketing together is going to move in the same fashion in terms of general increases or decreases, if that's the case. Because I'll show you on the next page where you can adjust how those buckets increase or decrease. We do have a few lines that are kind of hard-coded in, which is administrative expense, utilities, and then maintenance expenses. And the reason we have you make sure you put those in is there's a facility in the spreadsheet that if you add square footage, it will automatically calculate the additional cost for maintenance and facilities for you. And then we get into a section, non-operating reserves and transfers. And this is It's a nice section to use if you want to kind of start tracking your balance sheet. You don't have to do this piece, but you can. But if you're looking to put any fixed asset additions in, keep track of deferred maintenance, your depreciation expense. If you've got a PRISM account, that's a great place to put it. If you put in your plant value per your financial statements, and then if you've got any big gifts coming in for a capital campaign and any debt you have here. And then, debt service payments. These are all useful in terms of just projecting where that piece of your financial is going to go. So then you get down to a number where if you kind of got everything bucketed and added up right, it should tie to your budget, depending on whether you whether you have to back out debt service and depreciation and things will depend on how you budget. So that is your, current year inputs. So this is one page where you have to do a lot of work, and then the next page is the assumptions page. And as you see right here on line 12, there's an assumed inflation rate, because I said this model works off of inflation. I think it's easier to put in an inflation rate because that really is what drives all of the formulas. And then if you want to do something above or below inflation, add or subtract in the corresponding lines. Some people don't like to use the inflation rate. They just want to put in. Ooh. Was that a hint? See, they're going to, could just come back up maybe? We get lucky. At any rate, some people like to they'd rather type in their the full change on the corresponding line. So it's up to you, but as I said, I prefer to use the inflation rate. Let's see. Sorry. Lots of, okay. So here, if you're looking to add or subtract children, you would do that in these enrollment add lines, and these come over, or they're linked to the current inputs spreadsheet, so you'll see whatever you change them to, you'll see them here. So.
He's going to try and get them up.
Oh, okay.
Can you look at someone's laptop?
Oh, I can see it. The problem is they can't see it potentially unless they're on.
Well, they have theirs. So
There. Okay. If you're on the assumptions tab, okay. So lines 13 through 18 are the enrollment adds. That's where you would add the number of students or decrease, if that's the case, number of students. And you can put it in, and it will just go in that year for the enrollment adds or decreases. And then lines 19 through 24 is where you would increase or decrease your tuition over the inflation rate. So say you're going to assume a 2% inflation rate, but you want your tuition to go up by 3% each year, you would add a 1 in lines 19 through 24. And then that will be additive, and you'll see how that increases along. Now, these are set up so that if you put something in column E, it'll carry across. Each cell equals the one before it. You can overwrite those formulas. Anything in yellow, you can edit as you like. So, some people don't like to, I said, well, just let them Control-C across, but we're like, no, make it equal, so whatever. So those are all things you can change, and if you decide it's going to, be 1% inflation for, yes?
Are you able to override, my school is 9 to 12?
Mm-hmm.
Can I change, grades 5, 8, and?
Yeah, on the current inputs page, on those first 4 lines, you could do grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. You can, in the yellow, and then put your enrollment, so, and then it'll flow over to here.
Okay,
Yeah, yes?
great.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious if we're giving $1 million out of our
Mm.
How about the case where a family's getting $10,000, but it's coming from a donor? So, or EITC, OSTC money. So
Mhm.
it's up to us, we're giving it away, but it's not out of line.
I would say depending on if it's like an endowed type thing, then no. Otherwise, I would say make it another line of income. like there's some other additional income lines. So if it's, donor in, like you could say, financial aid donations or something, put the amount there and then put it up in financial aid too. So it essentially will kind of wash. But I would track it in both places just so you know you're covering it. So that was lines, 19 through 24 are where you can put in your tuition increases over the inflation, and then lines 25 through 30 would give you the total that you're increasing over tuition. So it'll do the addition for you. You guys still keeping up, or is this not? Okay. Line 31 just calculates your tuition remission as a % of gross tuition, and that in column D will give you what it is from your current year budget. If you want it to be something different on, this is line, sorry, I'm not used to working from the actual line numbers. Line 31, you can change that as you go forward. Okay, there we are, yay. Okay, so line 31, you can then, in the yellow, you can change your tuition remission as a % of gross tuition if you'd like. Financial aid is the same thing. If you want to change that, it just carries over from the current year. The new revenue items is if you are planning on starting a new program, you can add that revenue in here in the forecast, and that would be a dollar amount. Line 34, the annual giving and support, this is where I said it pulls over from the current inputs, but then you would make sure you add additional amounts. Like this one just stays level at 880,000, but if you're figuring you'd increase, then I would encourage you to put that in there. If you think the return on your endowment may go up or down, put those numbers in line 35. Cash gifts to the endowment, especially if you're planning a capital campaign, this is where you can show those incoming gifts. Spending rate will then multiply out based on your endowment value. So you can adjust that as you'd like to. Okay, then down in line 40, we start to get into the expense lines. Just so you know, the way this is set up is the tuition increases are something you can control, and it can be over or under inflation. All the rest of the income items just run at that inflation rate. That's how the item was set, how the spreadsheet was set up, kind of on the theory that for the most part, those other items do not change dramatically year to year other than, say, inflation. If you want to make dramatic changes, I'll show you where you can do it in another place in the spreadsheet. Faculty salary, all the expense items are similar in that you can go over or under inflation by making changes in the years 1 through 10. And if you're going to add additional headcount in various years, say you're going to add another class of kindergartners, you can add the teacher in year 3, because that's where you're going to add the faculty member. So then you just add that. You might need to make a salary adjustment for that to include that. And then also for like the health insurance and the other benefits, you may just want to increase that percentage over inflation just a little bit to kind of account for that extra person. The spreadsheet doesn't pick up and make those adjustments for you because it can't know how much you're going to spend on the benefits. So just kind of keep that in mind. And, most of the time, 1 or 2 heads don't, make a little bit of a difference in your benefits, but not a tremendous amount. And then you can also increases over expenses for all those, increases over inflation for all the expenses that you've put in, and you can adjust those as you need to. And then the sections lined 68 through 78 will just give you the total of the rate of increase that you're looking at. Line 79 and 80 is where you put your building square footage on the current inputs page. Make sure you put in something for that, even if it's just the number 1. Otherwise, there's some formulas that don't calculate. But at least if you can come close to your square footage, it's really helpful because then the spreadsheet will calculate a per square foot utilities and maintenance costs for you. And if you do add square footage, it will up those values for you. The spreadsheet is basically set up so that if you add square footage in 1 year, like say you add 10,000 square feet in year 2, the costs will show up in year 3, because the thought is that you put a new building into service, you build it 1 year, you put it into service the next year. And so then down here in lines roughly 83 through 91, you can add transfers to PRISM, your depreciation expense, et cetera. So there's some other items you can fill in if you'd like to. You don't have to use these lines. So that's the assumptions page. So this is really where you're going to do most of your work on these 2 pages. And then now we're going to get into some of the results pages. So 10-year snapshot is just a quick way to look at where you started and where you end. And when you start putting in your numbers, you'll see the dollar change and the percent change will come up. And this is just a summary kind of what you've got in there. So then the real fun page is the results page. And this is where you see the full line P&L for the 10 years, and you can see exactly where your numbers are going to come out. It does have some good ratios for you. Net tuition is percent of total revenue, et cetera. So it gives you some good ratios that you can work with and is handy to have on hand for your board, et cetera. Now, I would not recommend necessarily showing them this spreadsheet or the next spreadsheet because it's way too many numbers, but there are some other tabs down here that you can definitely use in a board meeting that can be really handy. Up here, this net income, baseline net income, and changes to baseline net income can be really handy. After you get all your current inputs in, and then you get your assumptions in, if you do Control Q, I think I can probably try this, let's see. What happens is this change to baseline net income went back to 0 because basically what you said is this is my base model. And so now this is where I'm thinking I'm going to go. So when you do the Control Q, it zeroes out the changes line. Now you can go back into the assumptions page and say, okay, I did have a 4% increase for faculty salary. What if I do 2% increase? If you make that change, then the change to baseline net income line will start to fill in, and you can see the difference that will make. So this is a good place where you can start making some changes. And then if you like that better, then you can hit Control Q again, and that'll fill in, and you can go from there. So 10-year snapshot. Whoops. We were in the 10-year. Okay, so here's the full line P&L. I'm sorry, the results was the ratios. 10-year financial forecast tab is the full line P&L where you can see where everything comes together and how it all shakes out over time. So this is one that you'll probably use yourselves. Don't know that it would get shown too much beyond your office, maybe your head of school, depending on how number savvy they are. And I apologize to any heads of school who are in the office. If you are number savvy, great, but if not, or in the room. My heads of school always used to, their eyes would glaze over. Exactly, Lala. Lala. Don't show me that, just tell me what the answer is. That was when I knew I was in the right position. The head of school I started under had asked me to look at where we thought things were going to shake out in terms of our retirements. Because when I started at the school, our faculty was a little bit older, and it was, lovely people. But when most of your faculty is kind of approaching 50 plus, you start to think about those things. So I did this big spreadsheet of, list of who was there and their age and expected retirement date. And so I showed it to him, and he just looked at it and went, yuck. And I looked at him and I said, your job? Yuck. So we agreed right there that we were both in the right place. And it was just fine because I had a great time putting that together. So now this next one is where we're starting to get into some fun. And these are some of the ones that you can really show to your board. Now this would be your enrollment forecast, especially, this gets more exciting if you are making changes to your enrollment. But you can see just what your total enrollment would be, how it goes out by year. You get a percent change for each bucket of kids you have. You'll get an annual change calculation down here in total. So this is a nice way for your board to see where you think you're going. Another one that gets really catches a lot of attention is the 10-year financial forecast, because it shows you where you are for your current year and where that forecast is going to end up in year 10. And so if, say, you put in like a 3% tuition rate, it's not going to be $14,300 in year 10. It's going to be something else. And this is where some eyes really open. This section here, the difference between, you do need to fill in these labels, but it can also be a real eye-opener because you can start to see where there might be some inflection points for your parents. Like, okay, I'm moving from kindergarten to first grade. That's a big jump. I don't know that I'm ready for that. Or I'm going from fourth grade to fifth grade. If that's lower school to middle school, that's a $5,000 jump. I don't think I'm ready. So you can start to see where you might get parents making a decision point and then go back and react and try and fix it. And it may be you're adjusting your tuition a little differently at different levels.
So that number reflects the tuition increase plus the change between grades?
Assuming you have one, yes.
If that's
Right,
the case.
yes.
It's both.
Yes, it's both numbers. And then here you would get the annual dollar change. And then if you're using an inflation rate, because sometimes when people don't, this doesn't, then this doesn't fill in. So this would just be exclusive. And then, wait a minute. Oh, this is just the purchasing power, and this is, you know what? I have to go back and check that. This, I think, is exclusive of inflation, so it would just tell you it's in twice. It just, if you had inflation, then you could see where the tuition is going relative to just your increase over inflation. Another one that can be really interesting is to look at this one. This is tuition rate increase, so this is starting to see how things are building up over time. And if you want to play with other tuition rate increases, you can do it here without going back and affecting your model. And then this is the total tuition and fees income. So this is the dollar amounts of all those the past three tabs that we've been looking at. So this is another good way, kind of, much smaller chunk of data that you can start to look at and work with. Next tab is 10-year salaries and wages. So this is how your FTEs, your mean salary and wages will go up, dollar changes, and then this is what your totals will be based on what you've put in for your FTEs, et cetera. And then here is the FTE forecast, as you can see, if you start adding people or subtracting people, how it's going to roll out through the years. We do have some tabs of charts, which I'll talk to you more about later, but we do have three types. We've got pie charts, bar charts, and line charts, and these are all really helpful to show to the board because a lot of times a picture paints 1,000 words, and so it's just much easier to show people the chart than it is to show them a whole bunch of numbers. So these are all here. Then if you are using, have an endowment and filling all that in, this can show you where your endowment might be going based on what your projected spending rate is and your return rates. So this is always, can be very helpful. And then if you put your depreciation in, have a PRISM reserve and or work on your deferred maintenance, this can kind of help you keep track of where your plant numbers are, which can also be really helpful. And then just 10-year net assets, which is just another kind of far out number to have some idea of where you might be ending up after all these changes. So that is the actual kind of detail behind the model. So, that's literally, like I said, the page by page. So you have some time now to work on the model. We can take about an hour to get stuff in, ask questions, talk amongst yourselves. I mean, your peers are really great sources of information too. But you can just dig in. And if anybody doesn't have the model, holler. I do have a laptop or a jump drive with it on. Go, hang on, this is. I always do this. Okay, go to review, and then either if the sheet is protected, this would say unprotect sheet. In this case, this particular sheet has been unlocked. But you'd click on this, and you'll get a box, and it says password to unprotect sheet, NBOA in capital letters.
Mary
Mm-hmm.
about how long, so if you were gonna really commit to this, right? How long would it take to enter in all the data and really get to a point where this is something that, you know, you kind of have all the numbers in there, and, you know, anything anybody's gonna ask you is all in one place kind of thing? How long does it take you to sort of get to that point?
I would say maybe a couple of hours, depending on how much time and how much uninterrupted time you have. Let's put it that way. If you can get yourself an hour where no one's bothering you, you could probably do it in about an hour. Because most of our budgets aren't that long or that, you know, detailed. So you can bucket it. So you could do, in theory, a lot of damage, so to speak, in an hour here. Get your numbers all in, and you can start to play with the assumptions. You can decide on what an inflation rate is. I think it's been nationally like 1.6% for the last few years on average. So you can throw that in to start. You can do some research and see, you know, what you might want to do locally for your school. But I would say throw in an inflation rate, even if you start with 2%. Just throw that in as a base, and then you can start playing with your some of the assumptions, because that's really where the bulk of the work is the, you know, once you get the current inputs, the current budget in, you generally don't have to play with that again. It's the assumptions where you're going to really spend most of your time.
And is there sort of a rule of thumb as far as, like, I know the business officers have a wealth of information, but is there anybody else who they should include in the assumption part of this? Like, who would be a good group of people to kind of get involved in this? Not necessarily plugging numbers in, but having discussions about the certain assumptions that business officers are going to make.
Great point. I would say take a first pass at yourself. Definitely talk to your head of school, talk to the development director, talk to the admissions director. I mean, talk to your administrative team, because they have some ideas about what they think is going to happen. I would say get that incorporated. Definitely talk to the finance committee chair and/or the finance committee. I don't know that I would go all the way to the whole board with this, but it would be, you know, if there's some issues that are popping up because you're doing this model, then the finance committee can take it to the whole board to say, okay, I know we've been talking about X. Well, if we do X, this is what's going to happen. But definitely, the finance committee is someone to work with. I've had some people literally take this into the finance committee meeting and kind of make some changes on the fly. I would suggest if you do that, have someone else taking notes for you, because literally people are spitting numbers at you and you're trying to make the changes, and then you're done and someone like, well, what do we do? And you're like, I don't remember. So have someone taking notes. But you can do it. Or sit with the administrative team and do it. You know, project it up and you can, what on earth did I do to my model? You know, so it's definitely something you can do with a bunch of people, but definitely talk to the rest of your administrative team peers and just, you know, kind of keep plugging. But it's to some extent, it's a little bit of a toy in that you can say, ooh, what happens if we do X, Y, or Z? Yes?
Anything that the formulas are such that as you put some assumptions in, you know, the model does its thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if there might be some anomalies you know are going to play out in certain years,
Mm-hmm.
you can go in and manually adjust them.
Yes, you can.
Every one of those yellow highlighted cells.
Yes, every one of those yellow highlighted cells, you can easily, you don't have to do anything to the worksheet itself. You can just adjust. Sometimes people want to really customize, and then they would have to unlock the spreadsheet, which is fine, you can do it. It's just, it's a little bit of a tedious process, because you have to kind of trace all the formulas through, because not only is it on the current year inputs page, it's on the assumptions page, it's going to be on the results page, you know, so you'll have to, any changes you make, you kind of have to ripple through a number of spreadsheets. So just,
So it's better to just do the manual entry of the actual
I'm going to say, yes, I think so, depending on what the change might be. But just keep in mind, too, that if you type in that number, think about what's happening next. You may have to continue to type numbers in the years after that, depending on.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is possibly the better way to do it is if there is some anomaly, you put it on a separate line. You have some provisions for additional lines. You may have to create a formula for that.
You might have to create a formula for it, or say you're expecting a big bump in, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like
Or a big change in financial aid.
a big change in financial aid, do it as a percentage of the total, and you can put in that percent in that year, and then it'll carry after that if you're not going to have that change. So just, I guess, think about what it is you're doing relative to the other pieces of the spreadsheet and do it that way. But you can overwrite in any of those yellow cells, you can overwrite a formula that's in there and put in either a number or percentage. I would just keep track of what's already in there. Oh. It should be the only one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. On this? It doesn't really appear to be on the PowerPoint.
Yeah, one of them said, get rid of the cars. It was on her, I know, it was on the,
I don't know.
There's like a thing called annotations
So she drew on it accidentally?
here. Yeah, just.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
27 on page 23?
People sometimes do that to me, and I'm like, wait a minute. I think it is.
Because I just entered the depreciation, but
Right. But I think you need to kind of put in. I think you put in the net because you are. You put in the net right now because you've had so much depreciation up to this point, and if you don't include it, you won't.
so if I put in the net and I also put in depreciation, it's not going to count twice.
It'll use the depreciation to factor further years, so,
Gotcha, but okay, so it
shouldn't-
won't
it
count
should-
twice in that year.
yeah, no,
Okay,
it
all
won't.
right, cool, thanks.
You're welcome.
Rocky is.
School jokes, actually. Soft. But actually, it's much higher.
Oh, great, no, that's, hopefully can be really helpful. Get something down, and you know this already. It looks like it's a lot of good work done already. Yeah, no, they do, it is really good, but it's, they have, I don't think. Yeah, they do a very good. There's that folder and then the model.
percent without division power.
I was gonna we have some cases to go through, so you can kind of play with the model and see how it works. So that's next, and then I just had just a couple things on if you wanted to report out and questions and answers. So I guess it's up to you. Okay. Depending on what's. Got it.
Thank you.
How are we doing, folks? Pretty good? Okay, we can get started a little bit. Let me close out of this and get back to our model here. Sorry. Oh, no, I didn't want to go from the beginning. Okay. Now that hopefully you've gotten your current year inputs in or pretty well along, and you've gotten some assumptions in, I have some cases that we can work through so you can see how the model behaves when you make some changes. So this is one we call price-sensitive school. And the case information is up here. You can read it. But basically what this is, the board has decided you are only going to go a small amount over inflation every year. So you can put this in, and if you put in your assumption in as, say, 2% is your inflation, and it'll be 1.5% above that. And they want to do salary increases of 4% per year. So if you do that, where does this take your model? So if you guys want to go ahead and play with that a little bit. Or actually, the salary increases is 4% above inflation, so that you can see where that takes you. I actually did this once at my school. We had a salary increase greater than the tuition increase. Our bank looked at us side-eyed, like, what are you doing? We said, it's promised, it's only for 1 year. It's only for 1 year. Which we did. So, Go ahead and, why don't you go ahead and try it, because I don't have numbers since you guys are all using your own, so just so you. Okay. So I guess the real question is, can you afford a 6% salary increase if you're only increasing your tuition by 3.5%? Okay. So, you know, some of this is, how would you work around this? Can you get more students in there? And how many would you need to get? Is one question you can answer with the model. How do you keep your operating costs stable? I mean, you increase the kids, you're going to have to increase all your, you know, you either increase kids and then you have to increase some of the other costs, so then how do you manage that? Or if you're going to increase the salaries by that much, where are you going to make the cuts to keep everything, you know, even keel? And then, you know, or the other option is you give some people a 6% salary increase and maybe not everybody is still there, which is, you know, one way to handle this. You know, some of these are, you know, questions you have to ask yourself. Can you pull from endowment to do this? What would you need to do with the annual fund to cover this, this change? And, you know, really, is this sustainable? So this is one of those places where you can go to the finance committee and or the board and say, look, I've modeled this out. You've asked me to put something together. I've modeled this out, and this is where we're going to end up. So it doesn't look, you know, usually it doesn't look good. You know, maybe some schools could do it, but so then you can say we have to take a step back. How do we manage this? Can we do something different? You know, so the other thing is, if you go look at a, you know, a 2% over inflation increase, so that it's 4%. So that would probably be a little less. Maybe you can handle it if there's only a 0.5% difference between your tuition increase and your salary increase, but usually even that gets out of control a few years down the line. So, you know, the other thing to start looking at is, you know, where's your tuition going to be in 10 years? Okay. Another scenario I have is the runaway financial aid school. This is one of my favorites. And this one I think is really important too, because I think a lot of us face this. Is the board tends to get really hung up on the number of kids at the school. They get this head count number in their heads, and it's, you know, we're not full until we have this many kids. So then the admissions office goes off and is trying to find these kids, and they may find really good mission appropriate kids, except they need more and more financial aid. And the more and more financial aid you hand out, the less and less money you have coming in. So you know, this is a way to show them what that does. You know, the more you increase your financial aid, the more of an issue it's going to be. And then how does that roll out from your classes? Because the other thing you tend to find is to find these kids, you're starting younger and younger, offering them aid. So then you're paying this aid for a longer and longer period of time. So you could, to work through this one, you can alter the model to assume a 10% increase each year in financial aid, which is roughly a 6% increase in financial aid as a percent of tuition, and then a 1% growth in enrollment. Because that's usually the other thing too. Oh, if we give more financial aid, we'll get more kids, which doesn't always work. And if you do this one, version A, and you start to think about some of the questions you should ask yourself in that is, you know, what is the impact on net tuition revenue in year 5 and year 10? And how much financial aid is a percentage of tuition revenue by the time you get out to year 10? And then, how are these numbers changing over those 10 years? So the other thing to think about is, some people have seen, a loss of tuition. Even though they're increasing their financial aid, the tuition is going up enough that they're losing kids. So then how does that all affect? Even though you're giving more financial aid, you're still seeing a loss. And then, this is where you can see how you might have to reduce some headcount in order to keep up with the changes. But these are some, kind of models to play with as you're getting used to the model. And then the last one is another one of my favorites is everyone is beloved. We know that at independent schools we have a tendency to hire people, and then they get to leave when they want to leave. They don't they don't leave any earlier. So sometimes things get a little bloated, for lack of a better term. These are truly people who are beloved by the students. The alumni come back, they want to see these teachers and the faculty and staff and everything. So they're there, and you usually end up hiring someone else to take care of the work that they maybe aren't doing as well as they used to, et cetera. So that really adds to your compensation line. So you can, add a couple people to your model to kind of take care of those extra people, the beloved employees, and then see where that plays out. And then the other thing to do is, if you say in 2 or 3 years you can convince them that maybe visiting with their grandchildren is way more important than being at school, you can reduce your compensation to take care of these employees and see how some of that plays out. And this is where, sometimes if you can get loose a little bit extra salary, it goes into everybody else's pockets, or it's a reduction in how much you have to increase tuition. But this is another way to kind of play with that model, and how do I adjust things to make it do what I need it to do based on the parameters I've put in. So this is all about just, what ifs, and if I've got this set of parameters, what do I need to do to make sure that we stay financially solvent and don't run into, too big a bump in tuition out in year 10 or year 7, or big division, changes between divisions. That's where all this modeling comes into play. You start to see, okay, I made this change here, but how does it affect all these other things? So this is really where the power of the tool comes in. So the only other thing I have for you is just talking about the reporting the results to people. The 3 charts that really can be the most helpful to you, for the most part, is the current year inputs, the assumptions, and then the 10-year financial forecast. That's where you're going to probably spend the most of your time. And then the charts that the board, or as we put, are shocking to the head of board, the 10-year tuition rates, the 10-year endowment spending, and the 10-year plant replacement, especially if you're not maintaining your plant and doing things every year to kind of keep things up, because that's one of your biggest financial assets, and it's also one of the biggest cultural assets. I mean, that is the thing that makes the first impression when you walk onto your campus, is your facility. So if you're not maintaining it, it unfortunately starts to look a little tired. Then families are like, oh, if the building's a little tired, how's the program, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can have a fantastic program. It just may not really show, and sometimes you do really need to invest those funds to keep that going. So a great way to tell some of this story visually is using the charts. Like I mentioned, the 3 tabs with the bar charts, the pie charts, and the trend charts. And these are nice because once you fill in your expense and income pieces, they'll flow through to the charts. If you unlock those pages, you can cut and paste and drop these into PowerPoint presentations, or a presentation. So it's a nice, easy way to give everybody a snapshot of what's going on without lots and lots of numbers and eyes glazing over. So, and then there is a time when using the table is actually useful. And here it's like in terms of tuition rates and where they start to change. And this is, just taking the Excel spreadsheet and putting in a picture of a circle, you can start to show them where changes between grade levels might get to the point where people will react and not want to continue on to the next level because it's too much. So then you can start to see where these things might pop out, so you can introduce that to the board or the finance committee, and then that's where you start working the process backwards. How do I avoid this? How do we manage this so it doesn't happen? So that is pretty much what I have for you. If you guys want to continue to work, that's fine. Certainly, I'll be here to answer questions. I'm not going anywhere till at least 3. But if you just want to put your heads down, I think that's really what it is. They just, okay, I've got it. Leave me alone. Right, exactly. Yes?
So have you, as a director of accreditation, I'm asking this question from
Okay.
Have you seen or experienced schools using this model with regard to the accreditation process?
I can't say that I have seen them specifically using this. We have seen a variety of long-range models like this. I do accreditation visits in the Isaacs area just because I was at a school and I happen to know the accreditation guy, the guy who puts together the teams. He's a former colleague of mine. So we've gotten a variety of things, but this is something that's pretty easy for schools to use if they want to. So it could certainly be, we could get like the full forecast, and I would say probably the assumptions pages, and then the ratios page, the kind of the results page would.
Taking, feedback in what Aggie was saying, that the accreditation receives financial models, all shapes and sizes, and
Mhm.
get the question sometimes there is a financial model. And the components of this, I think, would be so fantastic to pull out, be able to sort of use this, and then they can actually pull out
Mhm.
reports as part of the accreditation process. And, so I'm curious if you've seen that actually pan out.
I haven't personally seen that yet, but that's not to say that it hasn't happened, because I haven't spent a whole lot of time with a lot of accreditation directors at this point. But we're starting, NBOA is starting to kind of work towards those models of how can we help schools get ready for their accreditation visits and provide them some tools to work through all of that they would need to look at. Mhm. So. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Yes? I think we're good for you guys to just do what you'd like to do. I don't want to keep talking at you for no reason.
can do that.
Oh, it's only you. I think the other person
Yep.
dropped off.
This mouse is, there it is. Okay. Get that out of there. There we go.
All right. And what I will do is.
I'll reach out. It's yours.
Welcome.
Awesome, very helpful.
Oh, yes, and we did a pretty decent boarding school there, yeah. It was, people wanted to play, yeah.
You have 370 kids for an age grade?
We did.
Okay.
We're down to about 350. Yeah, it was, and they're all, I was there about 12 years. And they're active.
Where is it? You said in
It's in
Chicago?
down, it's right outside of Chicago, down in Illinois, wherever in the area. It's part of it, was built in 1929. Part of it was special tiles, kind of a prairie style architecture.
Is that north of Chicago or is it
Kind of
west?
a little west, southwest. Chicago, yeah. I felt like it too. Yes, I'm still there. It's the one outside the NBOA thing. Most folks are actually in the greater DC area. We work out of headquarters, we get everything on the location. And exactly, yeah. And most of what I do is not necessarily. I mean, I'm involved with people in the office, but a lot of it is just stuff that I have to do. So it's really, I do, I have what we call our content providers. Actually, on Thursday. I'm just a little bit.
You do a 5-day course or something for new business
Yes,
officers?
Business Officer Institute.
That was going to be on the East Coast. I thought the summer that got moved to.
It's in Cleveland.
It's in Cleveland this summer, right? That's what I thought. Is it always in Cleveland or?
No, it kind of moves around the country. Next year will probably be someplace less.
I thought it was going to be in the Northeast this summer, but maybe that was where it was last summer.
It wasn't Providence for us.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. It's just, it's an intense experience. It's 4 days total, but it's immersion. A lot of people have questions. And this is nice. Yeah, 50 to 70 people. So it's really nice. Yeah, I teach that. And we, so basically, there's the whole floor that's there, so we're trying to subdivide it, so we do a smaller floor, and they get to know it, and then like similar schools, or type of school, we try to arrange these so that they have computers to talk.
Yep. Cool. It's great meeting you.
Nice to meet you too. So we'll see you in Cleveland maybe for next year.
Absolutely. Why don't I go grab the car and bring it around? Oh, thanks very much.
That's good service, door to door. Yes. Oh, that's right, you're,
Very tempting.
oh, thank you very much. Jenny Madigan, yes, yes. That's November, January, yeah. Yes, she did actually. She was prior to the association. Yeah, I worked with her. I mean, it's wonderful. Perfect for her. No, I'm not going to that one. I'm actually going to the Midwest Business Management meeting, which is out in Phoenix, and saying I was out in the Midwest and normally not out in Phoenix. That's over for a little while. I will probably sleep. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for sponsoring. All the stuff.
Give us a call if you want to talk about it. Bring it.
Find out.
Yeah, and it's certainly something that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Right. They're taking on Right.
So you can usually fit into a program and,
Definitely.
hopefully something to consider.
Quite welcome. It's good.
But nowhere near. So your tab down there, great. Will do. Thank you.
You put that in the forecast. No, those, the ones in yellow, you can completely alter. The only ones that are kind of hard to fit in are just the facilities maintenance. Just to make sure